Welcome to the Ballot Brief, a podcast series of interviews with Democratic gubernatorial candidates ahead of the August 11th primary. First, I want to welcome our listeners and thank our media sponsor, Home Tech by Mosaic. I also want to thank our current guest, Milwaukee County Executive David Crowley. David, thank you very much for taking the time to chat with me and discuss what matters to my community in Eau Claire. I also want to start with a little disclaimer. This series does not indicate that the Chamber supports or endorses one candidate over another. It's simply a tool to allow community members the resources to examine each candidate and their platforms to increase voter turnout and amplify Eau Claire's voice in this very important election. First, I kind of want to start out with a broader question to get a feel for your priorities and, of course, welcome. What, in your view, is the biggest challenge that the Eau Claire business community faces?
Well, first and foremost, thank you for having me. I was glad to be here in Eau Claire, especially on this very warm day.
Right.
And had the opportunity to actually patronize some of the small businesses here in Eau Claire. So I just want to say thank you for having me and thank you for the work. But when I think about many of our businesses, one, I think that there's a lot of uncertainty that many businesses are facing right now. You know, whether we're talking about the tariffs, whether we're talking inflation or the uncertainty that's come out of this particular White House, but also the fact that people need resources, you know, and I do think that here in the state of Wisconsin, we need to provide a one-stop shop. And it's to help out not just our small businesses, but also our entrepreneurs. You know, when you're creating a new business, I mean, how many different entities do you have to contact, right? Mm-hmm. You got to contact the Department of Revenue or DSPIS or Department of Financial Institutions. And so I would like to create a one-stop shop to make sure that, you know, all of our businesses, our entrepreneurs, you know, they're getting access to those resources that they need, but also, you know, what don't they know that they may need to understand, whether that pertains to laws, policies, procedures related to the industry that they're working in. But I'm always talking about how do we continue to have greater partnership. I want to see many of our small businesses working with one another, building the capacity within our small communities or communities in general, just like here in Eau Claire, because the ideal is that we need to have the dollars being spent and be changing hands consistently in our local communities before they leave, not just those local communities, but also before they leave the state of Wisconsin.
Right. Yeah. And I guess before we really get into it, could you explain for some of our listeners what a Milwaukee County executive really entails and what experience you might be gaining from that and bringing to a potential governor?
I appreciate that question. Thank you for that, because not everybody has a county executive.
Right.
There's only about 13 or 14 of us throughout the entire state of Wisconsin.
Okay.
So as a county executive, I am like the county mayor. I am in an elected position. And so as Milwaukee County Executive, I represent 19 different municipalities, close to 1 million people within Milwaukee County. And the things that I'm responsible for is like Department of Health and Human Services. So we provide the mental health support, the safety net folks may need. We provide programs for not just our seniors, for people with disabilities, and for our young people. I'm responsible for the juvenile justice system. I'm not responsible for the jail, our sheriff is, but I have a community reintegration center, the only county that has a prison, basically, of those who have been convicted of misdemeanors. I'm also responsible for public transit within Milwaukee County, and that's not just our buses. I'm also responsible for our airport, our Milwaukee County Zoo. We have over 55 parks that I'm also responsible of, as well as about 13 municipal golf courses as well. And so we have a wide range of services that we provide. But just like many local communities across the state of Wisconsin, we need a greater partnership with the state of Wisconsin to make sure that we have enough resources to provide the services that we're responsible for.
Okay. Yeah. And so through this experience and also experience in the Wisconsin State Assembly, what sort of like leadership style are you looking to take into being a potential governor from those two roles?
You know, I'll give you one of my favorite quotes, right, which is no one cares what you know until they know how much you care, which comes from Teddy Roosevelt. And so, one, we have to build relationships. I think that's one of the issues that we're having, not just in politics and in government, but also in our communities, because there are so many folks who rather focus on division and distractions to keep their own power versus, you know, giving power, empowering those who are on the ground. And so my leadership style is really about making sure that we have as many diverse voices at the table. You know, if you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu. And I think many communities feel like they haven't had an opportunity to lend their voices, being directly impacted by certain issues, to be able to lend towards those solutions. And I think we're missing that throughout the state of Wisconsin to help us actually move forward, like our motto says. And so My leadership style is also about bringing my own weather. And what I mean by that is that, I like to have fun, right? So I like to bring the sunshine when I need to. But when we're working on behalf of the community and we got to negotiate and, make whatever we have to do to make sure that we're holding the line, but also focusing and staying true to our values, our morals, our ethics. It's about making sure that, when to bring that thunderstorm or when to bring that hurricane when need be. So for me, it's always about keeping people at the center of every decision I make.
Yeah, absolutely. And having fun, like stopping at Olson's when you get the chance.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So because the field is also still relatively large with the primary approaching, what's one thing that you tell voters to kind of differentiate yourself, maybe a policy position from the others in the field?
Well, I mean, what's different for me is that, one, I'm the second highest executive running the second largest government in the state of Wisconsin. And so I'm not just bringing ideas. I'm actually bringing proven policy that I've been able to implement that has done great work for us locally, but also has helped communities all across Wisconsin. We have built affordable housing units in Milwaukee County. And what's unique is that all 6 of these projects are happening in communities that never had affordable housing projects before. And that's because we tailored these particular projects to fit each community's needs. Just like I said, no one size fits all solution. But also, what also sets me apart is that we've brought Democrats and Republicans together. When we were able to get the shared revenue reform done, not just for Milwaukee County, but for every single municipality, that brought more money to every district, right? And so it's about building up upon those things. And so, I know that we can build not just affordable housing, but attainable housing, right? There are individuals who can't afford to move into a home. But unfortunately, the development that we're seeing 400,000, 500,000 homes being built. And I always joke, I'm the county executive of Milwaukee County and can't afford many of these homes that are being built. Right. And so we have to figure out, how do we focus on the missing middle? And so that's what really sets me apart, is that I have the receipts. I know what it's like to be accountable and responsible to the people. And so I know that I'll be ready on day one to hit the ground running, especially having worked across the aisle in the state legislature as well as a county executive.
And Eau Claire right now is well, and for the past couple of years has been facing a homelessness crisis. And so counties like Milwaukee that are leading the way, we're very appreciative that issue resonates across the state.
Absolutely.
Too.
And matter of fact, our housing division is working with individuals out here to figure out how we can spread the message, because good ideas shouldn't be hoarded.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Kind of going off your experience in Milwaukee, so many Wisconsinites outside of southeastern Wisconsin may primarily know you as someone who represents Milwaukee. How would you sort of reassure these voters in more rural places or places across the state that your administration would represent their interests just as much as Milwaukee?
Absolutely. I think when people hear Milwaukee, they think of the city, right? But I represent Franklin, Oak Creek, Bayside, right? Yeah. Shorewood, Glendale. And so, all of our focus is not just on the city of Milwaukee because they're the largest. But just like I said, this is about making sure that when the tide rises, we need all the boats to rise. And I always challenge my community. We always talk about being the economic engine of the state. And I hate that sometimes because it feels like we're beating our chest, not understanding that we do this in partnership with all of our local communities across the state of Wisconsin. And so the fact that I'm the only one in this race that have actually delivered for everybody, I want them to know I am committed to them. I'm not just fighting on behalf of the community that I represent because I need, Eau Claire to be successful. I need Barron to be successful. I need Marinette to be successful because we're all connected, right? If I want clean water and clean air in Milwaukee, that needs to also happen across the state of Wisconsin because it doesn't stop at the borders of our state. And so I am committed to this state, and I tell folks I'm a Wisco boy through and through. My father was a master electrician. My mother was a Jane of all trades. Even though they had their challenges, me and my father would travel all across this state, whether we are going to places like Beaver Dam to go catfishing or, going up to Green Bay to do the same thing, or going to Lake Winnebago or Lake Winneconne, or going to the Mississippi River to do duck hunting. I love this state. And we all have a responsibility when it comes down to the prosperity of this state. And so I don't just see myself as just representing Milwaukee. I see myself as an extension of the governor because counties, we are extensions of the state. And so I see the work that we're doing helping out everybody.
Yeah. So kind of moving off of like building relationships in the government. So the surplus bill failure in Madison caught a lot of headlines, and it's kind of frustrating voters that are looking for relief and affordability crisis right now. In the face of this need, the legislature was perceived to not be able to meet voters where they're at. So before we get into the actual messiness of how it was perceived and how it was taken in by voters, how do you think that it would have been an effective solution to begin with?
You know, when I seen this bill fail, I think it was a reminder that divided government is messy. You know, and after the bill failed, I felt like I was watching the Spider-Man meme in real time with all these fingers being pointed at one another. And so, you know, at the end of the day, you know, you need to make sure that enough voices are at the table, right? And I think that, you know, we can't be making decisions based off of politics. We need to be making decisions based off of what our constituents want. And as a county executive, you know, I have 18 different board members that represent different communities, and we don't always agree, but we're always willing to come to the table and have a conversation. You don't have to give up your ethics, your morals, your values in order to compromise. And I think we've lost our ability to do that in government. And so for me, you know, I think it's just important that we're making decisions based off of our districts. And so it is my hope that it failed not because of politics, but because constituents actually made the phone call and said, we don't want this. And if that's not the case, then we need to really revisit what our values are and how do we make sure that we're representing those that we were elected to represent the best way possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of everyone at the table means that everyone's also invited to have a seat at the table.
Exactly.
So governing as a Democratic governor potentially in a purple state means ensuring that both parties, you know, are available and accessible, able to access all of these rooms. So how would you approach a budget session in a way that ensures voters, not just, you know, vendettas across party lines, have a seat and that they're represented?
Well, those are the ones who matter the most, right? You know, the legislature is going to get your budget after the fact. And so I believe in having budget hearings. You know, as county executive, I do 5 budget hearings throughout the entire county to make sure that I'm hearing directly from the residents. But one of those budget hearings is me hearing directly from the employees of Milwaukee County about how we can change the culture, improve the culture, and make sure that we're doing right by them as well. And so I want to talk directly to the people and making sure that we're incorporating the ideas of our residents, of our business owners, of those who are relying on the programs and services that we provide as a state to make sure that they're not falling through the cracks. But I also believe that, you know, again, we don't just need diversity when it comes down to race, gender, and socioeconomics. We need that also with thought. And so I plan on having, you know, an open door policy with legislators when I'm the next governor, having meetings. You know, I don't believe neither party has a monopoly on good ideas. But I also think that when you talk to people who may not necessarily think like you, it gives you an opportunity to catch those unintended consequences and really focus on putting together solid pieces of legislation and policy that's going to help out everybody. And that's what we need to be focused on.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a Chamber of Commerce, we're on the complete same footing as that, that we just really want to bring people together and make sure that they're having the conversations instead of people who think that they might be speaking for someone else but not listening. So yeah, that is very absolutely necessary. So sort of switching gears into economic development. According to projections from the Wisconsin Department of Administration, Eau Claire is expected to be one of Wisconsin's fastest growing counties through 2040.
Congratulations.
Thank you. We also refer to ourselves as an economic engine. So as governor, how would you ensure that the next state budget positions growing regional economies like Eau Claire for long-term success while also meeting the needs of the state's largest metropolitan areas?
You know, I think this speaks directly to the shared revenue reform that we need here in the state of Wisconsin, because we don't have the ability to leverage our own economic activity, right? And so when you think about, you know, when you're having businesses coming inside and they're spending their money and they're paying people, a lot of those dollars go right to the state, and they make a decision through shared revenue, which is very antiquated, on how they're going to, you know, fund our local municipalities. But at the end of the day, if this is our economic development, you have to give us some level of leverage to figure out how we can invest locally, which not only helps out local communities, but in turn that helps out the entire state of Wisconsin. And so, one, I want to make sure that local businesses have a say on how we should be, how do we make sure that we're leveraging your business, leveraging the community, leveraging your workforce, leveraging the education, right? Because all of these things are interconnected, as well as housing, because how do you get a new business or grow a new business when you can't grow your population or you're still at the same capacity? And so we have a lot that we need to do. And I think that we have to simultaneously tackle all of these issues, and because we can't allow people to fall through the cracks. But we have to make sure that we're giving municipalities the ability to leverage their own economic development. Mm-hmm. And you do that by listening directly to what their concerns are and what they need in order to move their entire community forward.
Yeah. So you mentioned things like investments in education and, childcare, transportation, all of those sorts of things are important to kind of get the issue holistically under control. So as someone with experience working on large budgets, how would you, moving into a budget year, kind of prioritize which capital investments should receive priority?
Well, one, I think, I like to focus on the social determinants of health, right? And I want to be very clear, like health isn't just mental and physical. Money in your pocket is health. Housing is health. Public transportation is health. Public education is health. And so the one most critical building block that all of us need is housing. If you don't have housing, how can your child focus on their own education? If you don't have housing, how can you focus on your own health care or focus on getting a better job or getting the skill set to be able to get a better job, right? Or go back to school to say, So I think housing has to be a key part of this. One, bringing on, a little bit more density. One, that helps to naturally ease the property tax pressures all of us are seeing because we're bringing on more density, right? But it also helps to increase economic activity because that means people are spending more money in that community that weren't necessarily there or now have the ability to get a job in a particular community that wasn't available before because I don't want to travel 2 hours, 3 hours to go to the next opportunity. And so I do think that housing has to be critical, but I also think that healthcare is a part of this, right? And so, housing, healthcare, education, all of these things are intertwined. The better educated we are, the more healthy we are, right? The better access to good employment we have. And so, it's simultaneously hitting on all these three particular areas because they're all interconnected. And it doesn't just strengthen communities, they strengthen our school system, they strengthen our businesses, they strengthen our economy, and in turn strengthens the entire state. Yeah,
absolutely. And I mean, workforce also is something largely impacted by all of the, healthcare, housing that you just mentioned.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a crucial aspect of kind of aid for economic development and making sure that Wisconsin is an attractive place for businesses to move to, but also to expand and sustain existing businesses. But a shrinking and aging workforce adds to the challenges in these industries, such as manufacturing, construction, and healthcare. These are just among the conversations that we've been having here. Many workforce conversations that kind of focus on attracting workers, but businesses also need reason to locate and grow here. Yeah. So what do you see as the state's responsibility in attracting business investment?
Oh, we absolutely have a responsibility. I mean, even when you think about the entrepreneurs, tech entrepreneurs that we have here locally, I mean, a lot of the times they're getting their first check on the coast or Chicago. And I don't think that we do enough to scream from the mountaintop about all the great things that we're doing here. I think, one, we have a workforce that's second to none. We always talk about Midwest nice, but Wisconsin nice is much different, right? And I also think that we have, a great quality of living, and we have some of the best assets, world-class institutions, our school systems, our universities, having the largest fresh body of water right next door, and all the recreational activities that we have. But I don't think that we have done enough to really showcase what we have to offer. And I'll give you an example. Visit Milwaukee, our tourism industry in the Milwaukee area. They did a survey about how can we get more people to look at Wisconsin. And so they did a survey across the entire country about what do you view as Wisconsin. The first thing that people said when they did the survey, number one thing that they remember about Wisconsin is one, code. Right? Everybody that says it's cold here. And it's like, it's actually not that cold, but that's a whole nother conversation. The second thing that popped up, nothing. They couldn't even think of anything, right? And the third thing was not even beer, cheese, right? And so, but if you think about it, if I say Illinois, what's the first thing you think of?
Lincoln.
Lincoln, okay. Or Chicago.
Yeah.
Right? And so why don't we have that? Right? How come that's not the Packers, right? Or the Brewers? What are we doing to really showcase who we are, what we have to offer? Because it doesn't stop people from going to Illinois. It doesn't stop people from going to Michigan or Minnesota. And so we have a responsibility of really showcasing what we have to offer. And I think, we just have to leverage the opportunity to bring more businesses here. But also, when I say the opportunities, showcase our young people, showcase our universities. But we also have to start early, and what I mean by that is, my dad was a master electrician. And how do we introduce trades, at a much earlier age? I think now we're waiting until high school, and I think we're waiting too late. Right? How do we put this into our middle schools? And I think that's how we also, when we introduce our young people to things early, now they have something to aspire to be, right? If they don't learn about this at an early age, they don't know anything about it. And so I think that we have a duty in making sure that we strengthen the workforce pipeline for our young people and start at an early age so they understand the industries and the opportunities that are available for them. And that's how you bring those businesses.
Yeah, I'm interested then, and maybe your answer to this question is just to strengthen these partnerships, but if you think that there's kind of a place that the state government could step back and let the private sector lead, and maybe in those relationships with apprenticeships and things like that, getting them younger, but is there any way that you would like to expand on
I think there's many different ways, right? I mean, we have like the Fast Forward grants through the Department of Workforce Development that we can help to expand. But let's be let's get really clear about this. We got to go talk to the businesses. What do you need, right? And I think a lot of the times we like to come up with programs and services based off of what we think needs to happen. But we got to take a step back. And you take a step back, and I always say, you can't go into somebody else's house and tell them where they need to move their chair, their furniture, and all these different things, and what color to paint their wall. But we're doing that through our programs and our services, and we're not bringing people to the table to actually lend their voice. But I do think that there are opportunities to strengthen partnerships and relationships, with our trade unions, with our tech colleges, with our K through 12, and just nonprofit organizations that's helping to fill the void. But I do think that a lost opportunity is related to our technical colleges, because these are regional workforce development, centers in a sense, right? They are bringing in young people as well as returning students, and they know what opportunities are available in the region. They know what jobs are, what particular jobs need to be filled. And if we can work directly with those tech colleges, we can pipeline people directly into those family-sustaining job opportunities that they need.
Yeah, so kind of off of economic development, an issue arises with the workforce. According to Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce, a recent survey, workforce shortages remain the number one concern among Wisconsin employers, with many businesses struggling to find new, reliable employees despite the growth. Eau Claire is one community especially feeling this growing pain in a time of constricted funding from the state. We already touched on shared revenue and other schemes that we could use to combat this, but a shrinking and aging workforce has really just made it difficult. Wisconsin's population is leaving at a higher rate than they ever have. So do you think that there are tools that the state government has that could have a positive impact on this issue that aren't being utilized currently?
I think there's a few tools, right? One, I'm going to go back to housing, right? And you have young people who are leaving the state of Wisconsin, taking advantage of, education in some other places. But if they decide that they want to come back to Eau Claire, can they afford to?
Right.
Is there a home for them to move into? I mean, right now, the average age of buying a home is 40 years old. And I just turned 40. And I just, I had the opportunity to buy my house that I was renting from, 6 years ago. But young people don't have these opportunities right now. And so, one, I think that housing is extremely important, because when you think about why we can't find people, is because, one, they don't have anywhere to go. Right. And no one wants to, again, travel 2, 3, 4 hours away, just for employment, because, one, if you do have a vehicle and you think about the rise in gas prices that we have seen, it feels like you're going to work just to pay somebody else, because even if you are making more money, you're getting less because everything is that much more expensive. But I do think that another thing that we really need to do outside of housing is providing the technical assistance for many of the small businesses, entrepreneurs, for them to be able to grow and create more opportunities, right? And, the more and more that you can see, homegrown businesses coming online, they're the ones who actually tend to hire more from local communities, right? And we have to be intentional on that, because small businesses, they're the backbone of Main Street. Wall Street is not supporting us the way that we need to, and we have to figure out how do we grow our economy in those capacities. But I would also say healthcare is also a part of this issue, right? And it's hard to find, someone to hire when, you may not be able to provide healthcare, or, people are now coming up against that fiscal cliff and don't know if they want to take that $1 an hour extra, because now they're going to lose more of their benefits than they're actually going to be gaining through employment. And so I think there's multiple avenues that we have to tackle. But it's going to take bringing these small businesses to the table to figure out exactly what do we need to do to support them moving forward.
Right. Yeah. And you mentioned healthcare costs for the average Wisconsinite, but also healthcare costs for businesses and workers' comp is a huge topic of conversation right now as well. Is there kind of a solution you see to this burden that it puts on businesses?
Well, the more people you have covered, the cheaper it becomes for everybody. I think about, at Milwaukee County, we have about 4,000 employees. And you think about also our retirees, and we have to pay for their healthcare systems as well. Now, we're very unique as a county because we're actually a self-insured county. So we actually pay out of pocket for all of the procedures and things of that nature. But when we look at our healthcare costs, we're looking at 10-15% increase year over year, right? And that's not including the prescription drugs, right? And so, we have to get this cost under control. And the way that you do that is by getting more people covered. And so by expanding Badger Care, giving entrepreneurs, small businesses, gig workers, students, the ability to pay into this system, but also providing a sliding scale fee, right? So people can actually be covered is going to be extremely important, for our workforce, because people are making decisions based on whether or not they're going to have health care. And, the more and more we can get people covered is great, but the more and more we can get people to focus on preventative care, that's how we actually lower our costs long term. And so for me, I want to see people going to the doctor less, because we figured out how to educate as many people as possible about the preventative care opportunities that are out there, what they need to do in order to keep costs low for everybody in the state of Wisconsin, and eventually and hopefully across this entire country.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of just being like a full circle. So there's a lot of aspects that play into effect when it comes to growing a workforce. Yeah. Healthcare, education, investments just across all of these industries. And it's often when there's workforce challenge that they're rooted in other issues beyond hiring. These housing shortages, childcare, kind of as we touched on. So if you could pick your top 3 items to prioritize in the coming budget, what would they be?
It would be housing, healthcare, and education. And when I say education, that includes both childcare and K-12.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then another really crucial part of this conversation in workforce economic development, to kind of tie it all together, is data centers.
Yeah.
To kind of expand on this and Wisconsin's competitiveness, in November, you stated that Wisconsin should make sure that this is fertile ground for entrepreneurs and businesses to either stay or move right here to the state of Wisconsin. Since then, has your position changed at all, or kind of what's the evolution of your stance on data centers?
Well, one, we should always welcome new businesses. New technology is going to move us forward, but we also need to make sure we're protecting ourselves and having guardrails in place. And so I think there's 2 different conversations. There's a data center conversation and there's a AI conversation. But to touch on the data center one, I find it mind-boggling that the state legislature left session but actually putting protections in place, right? And so this is about how we protect ourselves, because any of these data centers, they can go to Michigan, they can go to Illinois, they can go to Minnesota, right? They can go anywhere in the country. But we have to be clear about something. Our clean air and water doesn't stop at the borders of the state of Wisconsin, which means that they have the ability to still contribute to harm in our communities. So why can't we put in place the gold standard? Mm-hmm. And so I truly believe that, one, when it comes down to data centers, 100% pay for your own electricity, pay for the grid upgrades, pay for any infrastructure upgrades, and you have to adopt the Beyonce approach. The Beyonce approach is bring your own new clean energy. That's the acronym. Okay. And so they should be focusing on building their own new clean energy because, one, we need to invest in that infrastructure just in general, right? But we also need to make sure that local units of government has a say-so. And no local unit of government should be able to do anything behind closed doors. We have to be transparent. And if you're not willing to be open and honest with the people who have elected you, then you, quite frankly, you shouldn't be in office. So I don't like seeing these non-disclosure agreements, particularly when it comes down to a government, because it's stopping people from actually learning what is happening, and it interrupts the trust that especially local units of government has developed, and so that's extremely important for me. But I also look at the data centers, one, putting the protections in place, but there's a way to actually leverage this for our entrepreneurs, for our small businesses, for our legacy industries, for our local units of government, for our schools. There should be project laborers agreements in place. There should be community benefit agreements in place. And not just for where they are, but for the entire state of Wisconsin, because we're all going to be affected. And I would argue they should be subsidizing our energy costs. And I think the way that we can do that is whenever we open up our utilities bill, we all pay into focus on energy, and that helps to build the clean energy infrastructure that we need. Well, there's only so many workers, and there's only so many projects that you can do throughout that time. Well, the XX dollars that is there, how about we use that to pay down everybody's electricity bill, right? And so let's look at this about how we can leverage it, but we absolutely need to make sure that we put guardrails in place. And I look at that when it comes down to artificial intelligence. I know it's being used in healthcare. We know it's being used in many different businesses. But I look at it as it should be helping to assist with productivity, not replacing human productivity. Mm-hmm. And so let's utilize it when it comes down to, what we can do. But the final decisions, whether it's healthcare or anything dealing, directly impacting people's lives, it should be a human. It should be a person making that final decision and not artificial intelligence. And so we need to make sure that we put a commission in place as well to protect our young people. I don't want them utilizing their data, at a young age and manipulating that to advertise directly to them as they get older, And I mean, the other guardrails that we have to be put in place. I mean, I don't know about you, but I see a lot of different. I see a lot of caricatures of myself that is, from artificial intelligence. And no one knows what's real or not, when you're on social media looking at artificial intelligence. And I believe that we have to have a disclaimer, no matter what, so people know what's real, what's not, to make sure that we're protecting our society for the long run.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up the distinction between AI and data centers, because I think that the conversation kind of gets conflated a little bit. It gets confusing and becomes a data center debate when really what is the core issue is the morality of AI and the advancement of AI. But kind of going back to data centers, I'm curious because you bring up kind of having environmental regulations in place to protect our air and our water. Kind of what in your view, would be the line between making sure that we have those regulations, but also making sure that Wisconsin is an attractive and welcoming place for these data centers to come in? Because I'm not speaking for anyone or predicting anything, but if Wisconsin goes through the process of coming up with these sorts of regulations, do you think that there would be a world where a business would see that and think, oh, they're not welcoming to me, I don't want to go there?
I mean, at the end of the day, you have to bring all the players to the table. And so you want to make sure that we're rowing in the right direction. But we have to protect ourselves no matter what, no matter at what cost. Now, I know that some people will say, well, we should do away with it, but if you say as a state we're going to do away with it, are we really? Because if they're staying within this country, they're still going to be somewhere. And when I think about my data and all of our people's data here in the country, like, I don't want that to be somewhere overseas, right? Like I want to keep it here. But also, if there's no reason why we can't do both, right? We have a lot of emerging technological companies right here in the state of Wisconsin that's doing great things, and we still have those guardrails in place. We don't want to stifle innovation, but we do want to make sure that we're protecting people's data, that we're protecting people's privacy, that we're protecting industries moving forward. But at the same time, while we're focusing on those protections, we can help to actually blossom the creativity that we have throughout Wisconsin.
Yeah. So there's a lot of also fractures within the Democratic Party, even about stances on data centers. There's fractures, in this race, even on the Democratic side, about what the best approach is to take. So if Wisconsin took the approach of coming up with environmental regulations in the case of data centers, what is a realistic timeline that would take? Because my follow-up question to that is like, if the legislature spends time kind of party deciding what a useful regulation would be, would that be enough time?
I mean, I think we can get it done right away because it's already bills on the docket, right? Senator Jody Habish-Sinekin had a great framework in place to make sure that we're protecting our air and our water. There's no reason why we can't bring something like that to the table today, right? And so it doesn't take that long to make sure that we have the guardrails and the protections in place. It's about having the political will. And in speaking to that, right, because, some people will say, well, let's do a moratorium. Well, a moratorium on what? You can't do a moratorium 8 months after the fact, right? And so we just have to be realistic as far as where we are. And we have to realize that you need the legislature on whatever is going to be done moving forward. And so we have to have open and honest conversations, because my biggest fear, especially on my side of the aisle as Democrats, we can't continue to talk about promises that we absolutely can't deliver. And that's why we're losing so many voices in the Democratic Party right now.
Yeah. So in a scenario where you have transparency, where you have local input, and where you have those protections in place for the environment, what would you say is an ideal scenario or approach for a potential data center to take towards kind of a blanket statement? Because obviously every community is different with different needs, right, and would genuinely think about a proposition under different scenarios.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, for me, it's protecting the community that's there, right? We hear about the light and the noise pollution. So what are we doing to make sure we're minimizing that? Because I do think that we're taking particularly what is happening at one particular hyperscale data center and blanking, having blanket statements on what all these other data centers are, even though they're nowhere near the same scales. But does it mean that we can't do what needs to be done? And I think that's really the clear message, is that we need people who is willing to do right by those that they represent. And unfortunately, we haven't seen that being done. And so as the next governor, I think that we can walk and chew gum at the same time.
Yeah, so you've stated kind of what we've already touched on, that development should be transparent, accountable, and judged by whether or not it delivers real benefits to the people who live in Wisconsin. So for our listeners, and to better clarify the differences among the candidates and the still large field, where do you think that your approach to data centers diverges from your running mates? And you've already mentioned the moratoriums and that wouldn't be the right fit for our state. But do you think that there's any other things to clarify there?
Well, I mean, I just want people to understand that, it is our job to make sure that we're protecting the community. And what also sets me apart is that, we actually have a policy to make sure that they're not only paying for their own energy, but they're subsidizing everybody's energy across the state. We have policies that make sure that we protect our water, that we protect our land. And I don't mean protect our land and water just for now, because everybody talks about, what about the 50 years after? That's what I'm thinking about, right? How do we make sure that as new technology emerges, that we just don't have these huge empty buildings in communities? And so we have to set aside a cleanup fund, and not just for environmental cleanup, but what are we going to do with these buildings moving forward, and how we can actually occupy or utilize them in some type of capacity that actually benefits not just that particular community, but benefits our state. And I would say that's what really sets me apart, is that we're actually bringing a pragmatic solution to the table where we can get bipartisan support where we are. But, if folks, if we don't want to see data centers, if we don't want to see, whether it's in Wisconsin or across this country, the best thing that we can do is put down our phones. The best thing that we can do is stop watching Hulu, stop watching Netflix, stop watching, because we are creating this future by how much technology, how much of the internet, and how much data we use, right? And, I was joking with my wife not too long ago. When was the last time you went into your Google folder or your data, your Apple data, and actually deleted pictures or deleted anything, right? Mm-hmm. And this is the reason why we're seeing this level of data centers coming up, because sometimes we don't know how to get rid of stuff. We used to hoard physical stuff. Now we're hoarding,
Mm-hmm.
all this digital stuff, and that's what's creating this level of demand. And so, it's going to take organizing. It's going to take honest conversations moving forward about data centers. But we just have to be open and honest about the conversation and not put false realities out there about what we can and cannot do.
Yeah. And it sounds like a big part of the conversation is what you mentioned, that like data centers will come in and then vacate, and then there'll be big empty areas where these hyperscale data centers could have been. And there's multiple examples in Eau Claire, not to add on to the argument, but there's multiple examples in Eau Claire of collaboration after like Uniroyal had left, or Sacred Heart had left the 900 district, just announced a new collaboration there. So there's plenty of room for the private sector to also have a role in this. And so I appreciate that you highlighted that sort of.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, the thing is that, we have to have some forethought. We have to understand that. And it's not just data centers, it's any business, right?
Exactly.
And so, but, we don't treat every industry this way. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't be hard on these data centers, because this is brand new for us.
Yeah.
And so we have a duty to protect our environment. We have a duty to protect our people. And we absolutely have a duty to protect our workforce.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So before we sort of wrap up, do you think that there is a policy issue affecting Wisconsin's business community that isn't being properly addressed, or has the tools to be addressed but hasn't yet?
What I don't know about everybody else, but what's scaring me a little bit is the many monopolies that are starting to come online. And I think it's stifling competition with many of our small businesses because they're being undercut. I do think, particularly when it comes down to the Unfair Sales Act that we have here in the state of Wisconsin, that it affects many of our small businesses and is unfair because we have a mandatory markup, for gas, which costs us close to about 35-40 cents a gallon, that I think that we should be getting rid of. And so I think when it comes down to businesses, one thing that we could do a much better job of, and I'm not saying this as an elected official, but particularly as a Democrat, it's actually bringing them to the table and actually having conversations. Mm-hmm. I want to make sure that we create an environment where our workforce absolutely has a voice. But we don't have a workforce unless we have businesses, and so we need to make sure that we can bring both to the table to have good conversations, be able to negotiate, and make sure that we're not just increasing productivity, but we're taking care of those who are providing that product for customers.
Yeah. So, and also, just because I'm curious, what has been kind of messaging that you feel like has been received very well by voters as you're kind of going on the campaign trail?
Well, I mean, everybody, our thing is the Badger basics. And, what's resonating with them is that I want to build a much better foundation for families all across the state. And the Badger basics is focused on 3 pillars: affordability, care, and opportunity. One, affordability matters to everybody. Childcare, healthcare, groceries, utility bills, housing. We have to make things that much more affordable. But it's also care, right? Whether we're talking childcare, healthcare, but one thing that we don't talk enough about, senior care. We have a lot of folks who are getting older, and I want them to age with dignity. I want them to live with independence, but we're not providing many of those opportunities in the long-term care facilities that we've seen across the state. Many of them have went by the wayside. And so I think that we can get creative, not only creating senior housing, right, but then we can wrap around those services in those senior housing, to make sure that people are getting access to the care. And when seniors move out of their home and move into senior housing, we're now opening up more housing opportunities. And so that's the care piece. And then opportunity. It comes with education. It comes, how do we create more dual enrollment programs for our high school students so they can, go directly into a tech college or to a university and continue their credentials and see the cost of education really come down for them. And so creating opportunities by raising the minimum wage, because I think about a family that I know who currently lives in Arizona when I was visiting, and I said, oh, y'all are looking for employment? Come on back to Wisconsin. We have plenty of job opportunities. And the first thing they said to me was, your minimum wage is too low. And I'm like, well, we're not paying that. It was like, it doesn't matter. It's too low for me to be thinking about employment in Wisconsin. And so even in red areas, right, across the entire country, their minimum wage is at least $15 an hour or $18 an hour. Yet it is yet to budge. And it hurts me because I think about, on the way here, I was just talking about my first job that I had when I was 14 years old. And I made $7.50 an hour, 25 years ago. And you look at the minimum wage today, it's $7.25. And so we have a long road ahead of us. And so I just want to make sure that we're doing right by everybody. But I just want folks to understand that, I know Toy Story just came out, but they can look at me as they Randy Newman. They will always have a friend in me of really coming to the table and making sure that I'm fighting on behalf of every Wisconsin constituent.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you could just give listeners like one thing to take away from your candidacy, from your platform, what would that be for the Eau Claire business community?
It's a great question. One thing, that was a lot to boil down to one thing, but the one thing is that I'm ready. I am ready to come to the table and tackle the hard issues. And what's different for me, and I've been a part of national organizations with the counties association and things of that nature, and I have this nickname of being the recycle man. And people say, well, are you the recycle man? And it's because we've picked up every damn can they've kicked down the road for generations. And that's what I want to do. It's not just about short-term wins. I want to make sure that our short-term wins fold into the long-term gains that we need for this state, in making sure that whatever we create is sustainable for future generations. And not just for people, but for our businesses, for our older adults, for everybody who calls Wisconsin home.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, David Crowley, thank you again for taking the time to cover these important issues with me and share your perspective on the issues facing our community. We appreciate your willingness to engage with the Eau Claire business community and discuss the issues facing our region. Be sure to check out other candidate interviews on this playlist and visit the Eau Claire Area Chamber of Commerce website for additional voting and candidate information and resources related to this election. Reminder, it's on August 11th. Thanks again to our media sponsor, Home Tech by Mosaic, and thank you for listening.